They said the desert swallowed secrets whole. Nora had counted on that when she stepped off the westbound train, carrying nothing but a battered carpet bag and a heart too bruised to beat freely. In a land where names and histories meant survival, she had neither to offer, only silence, only dust. The town of Dry Creek wasn't kind to strangers, especially women who moved like smoke and carried fear stitched into their very bones. But sometimes fate wasn't a storm. Sometimes it was a quiet offer. A man who didn't ask questions, who didn't demand explanations. A man who simply said, "Stay if you want." The past doesn't own you here. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to start over. The first time Nora crossed Main Street, the town barely blinked. A few curious glances, a sharp whisper or two, but mostly the kind of polite indifference reserved for tumbleweeds and stray dogs. She moved with purpose, skirting the edges of storefronts, her head bowed beneath a fraying hat. Dust clung to the hem of her worn skirts and filled the cracked leather of her boots. Each step whispered a silent prayer. Don't notice me, don't see me, let me pass unseen. Dry Creek was a town stitched together by stubbornness and fear of change. The banker's wife preened in her lace-trimmed dress. The blacksmith hammered horseshoes with a rhythmic finality. The sheriff, a stoop-shouldered man with a badge more tarnished than bright, watched everything and said nothing. Nora understood the message written in their glances. Strangers are trouble. Women without names, even worse. The livery stable offered her the only kindness she dared accept. Old Tom, the stable master, never asked who she was or why she slept curled in the loft with the hay bales. He only left a folded wool blanket near the ladder each night and muttered about the desert nights being cold. She repaid him by rising before dawn, helping feed the horses before slipping away like mist before anyone else could see. At the saloon, she found small mercies. A tired-eyed woman named Maybelle, all hard hands and soft heart. Let Nora wash dishes in the back for leftover bread and a cup of weak coffee. Don't need your story, sweetheart, Maybelle rasped over the clatter of plates. Just need clean dishes and quiet hands. Nora gave her both. Still, every alley, every corner seemed to breathe with the weight of eyes she could not see but always felt. Judgment hung heavier than the desert sun. She learned to move like a ghost, always with one hand near her carpet bag, the only thing she owned besides the bruises she kept hidden. It was on the fifth evening, as the sun bled across the mountains and shadows stretched long across Dry Creek, that she first felt his gaze. James Cutter. He sat at the far end of the saloon, nursing a whiskey that he barely sipped, a battered Stetson shading sharp eyes that missed nothing. At first, Nora thought he was like the others, curious, suspicious, but there was something different in the way he watched her. Not possession, not judgment, recognition. As if he saw the same fractures in her that lived in him. She kept her head down, scrubbing the counter with mechanical precision, but her heart beat a wild tattoo against her ribs. When she dared a glance upward, he was still watching. Not with hunger, with something quieter. Something that felt dangerously close to understanding. Nora clenched the rag in her hands tighter, breathing shallowly through her nose. Understanding could be just as dangerous as hatred. Maybe more. She was just another shadow to most of Dry Creek. She needed to stay that way. She had survived too much to believe in the kindness of strangers, and yet deep down where old hopes still flickered, she wondered, just once, if someone might see her not as broken, but as becoming. The next evening, Nora almost didn't go to the saloon. The whispers had grown sharper after the supply wagon arrived, bringing fresh gossip with the barrels of flour and sacks of beans. Word was out. A stranger, no family, no past, working behind the bar like a ghost made flesh. The town didn't like mysteries. Mysteries turned into trouble faster than a flash flood. But the need for bread and coins, no matter how few, outweighed the shame of side eyes and muttered slurs. She tied her battered boots, adjusted her hat low over her brow, and slipped into the dusky streets, moving like a shadow across the silent town. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and stale beer. The piano man played a broken tune no one listened to. Maybelle nodded once at Nora without speaking, approval enough, and there he was, James Cutter. Same table. Same slow whiskey. Same steady gaze that weighed more than words. Tonight he didn't just watch. He moved. Nora felt the shift before she saw it. The scrape of boots across the worn floorboards. The weight of decision hanging in the space between heartbeats. She kept her eyes trained on the chipped mug she was drying, pretending not to notice as he crossed the room. His voice was low, roughened by years under open sky. "Name's James Cutter," he said, setting a coin on the bar. Not for a drink. For her. Nora stiffened. Most men introduced themselves with expectations. A favor. A smile. A night. She waited for the ask. It didn't come. He only added, "If you ever need work, real work, I run Cutter's Hollow a few miles north. Always a place for steady hands. No questions, no demands. An offer, plain as the day." Nora swallowed the lump rising in her throat. It had been months, maybe longer, since anyone had spoken to her without wanting something in return. She forced herself to meet his gaze. There was nothing lurking there. No hunger, no pity. Just a man, weathered and worn, offering a bridge she could choose to cross or leave behind. She said nothing, only nodded once sharply before turning back to her work. James Cutter didn't push. He just tipped his hat with a ghost of a smile and walked out into the cooling night, leaving the heavy door swinging behind him. Later, as Nora scrubbed the last of the mugs clean, Maybelle shuffled over, her apron dusted with flour from the kitchen. "Be careful with that one, girl," she said gruffly, though not unkindly. "He's got scars, same as you. Only difference is, he knows how to carry 'em without letting 'em drag him down." Nora didn't answer. She didn't trust men, didn't trust kindness dressed in worn leather and soft words. But a tiny, treacherous part of her, the part that still remembered hope, tucked the memory of James Cutter's offer deep into the folds of her battered soul. Just in case. That night, in the hayloft of the livery, Nora lay awake long after the stars had burned holes in the dark sky. The blanket old Tom had left for her smelled faintly of horses and pipe smoke. Oddly comforting. She traced the calluses on her palms, the bruises faded now but never truly gone, and thought about the man who asked nothing. Could there really be a place where the past didn't matter? Where scars were seen as proof of survival, not stains of shame? The desert wind whistled through the cracks in the barn walls, carrying the scents of sage and distant rain. Maybe. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to see if a stranger's quiet offer could be more than just another mirage. Nora closed her eyes, cradling the thought close to her chest like a fragile, flickering flame. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find out. The morning sun baked Dry Creek in a haze of gold and heat. Dust spiraled lazily along Main Street as if the earth itself were too tired to move. Nora stood at the edge of town, her carpet bag heavy in one hand, the weight of her decision heavier still on her shoulders. Cutter's Hollow lay somewhere beyond the hills, a promise whispered in worn leather and quiet words. A place where the past didn't matter, where a woman could be something other than the ghost she had become. She shifted her bag higher and set off, boots crunching against the dry, cracked ground. The ride to Cutter's Hollow wasn't far, but it felt like crossing a desert of memories. Each step carried her farther from the nameless life she'd carved in Dry Creek's shadows, and closer to something unknown. She found James Cutter mending a fence near a sprawling ranch house, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, hat pulled low against the sun. He looked up as she approached, setting aside his hammer with unhurried ease. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two souls worn thin by different storms. Nora lifted her chin. "I'm here." No explanations, no apologies. Cutter nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing more and nothing less. "Figured you might be." His voice was a slow drawl, roughened by dust and time. "Come on, I'll show you around." The ranch sprawled wide across the valley, a patchwork of grazing fields, corral fences, and a narrow creek that split the land like a vein of silver. There was a weight to this place, not oppressive, but solid, as if it had been carved from stubbornness and held together by grit. Cutter walked her past the barn, the tool sheds, the smokehouse, introduced her to a pair of ranch hands, Tom, gray and gruff, and Levi, younger, wiry, with sharp eyes that missed little. Neither asked questions. Neither treated her like a curiosity. Just a nod, a muttered greeting, and the quiet acceptance of people who understood that survival sometimes meant minding your own damn business. Finally, Cutter led her to a small cottage tucked against the slope of a hill. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a single room. Clean, spare, the scent of sun-baked wood hanging in the air. "Place is yours," he said simply. "A bed, a stove, roof that don't leak much when it rains." He paused, studying her face with that same steady, unreadable gaze. "I ain't offering charity, Nora. This here's work for work." She nodded, understanding without needing it spelled out. No past, no questions. Only the future they could build, one stubborn day at a time. "What would you have me do?" she asked, voice steady despite the ache in her throat. "Help where you can. Cook if you're able. Tend the garden, mend what needs mending. Simple things." He scratched the back of his neck, suddenly a little sheepish. "Truth is, this place has been running on borrowed time since my sister passed." Sister, the word hit her harder than she expected. A glimpse of a different kind of loss. "I can cook," she said quietly. "And so, and," she hesitated, "I'm good with horses, gentling the ones no one else can touch." A flicker of something warmed Cutter's eyes. "That's so," she nodded. For the first time in too long, a piece of who she had been, who she still was, slipped free from the ruins of her old life. He pulled a worn leather satchel from his belt and dropped it onto the table with a soft thud. Inside lay a small pouch of coins. "First month's pay, fair wage for fair work." He shrugged. "You earn more, you'll get more." Nora stared at the pouch as if it might vanish. A real wage, not scraps, not charity, a chance. She looked up, finding James Cutter watching her with quiet patience. No demand, no expectation, just a man offering a clean ledger and a place at the table, should she choose to sit. She reached for the pouch, her fingers brushing his, rough hands calloused by years of honest work. Their eyes met again, and this time, she didn't look away. Outside, the desert wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and promises not yet broken. Inside, Nora Carter, no longer just a shadow, pocketed her first honest wage in months and crossed the threshold into her new life, one careful step at a time. The horse was a ghost long before Nora laid eyes on him. They called him Dustfire, a half-wild Mustang with a scar running down his flank like a river carved through stone. Captured on the northern range 6 months back, he hadn't let a soul near him since. James Cutter brought her to the corral one dusky evening, a rope coiled loose in his hands, his eyes cautious but curious. "Figured you might want to try," he said, jerking his chin toward the restless figure pacing the fence line. Dustfire moved with a desperate energy, ears pinned, eyes flashing white whenever anyone approached. His coat, beneath layers of dust, was a rich chestnut, and the scars crisscrossing his hide told a story of battles fought and survived, much like Nora herself. She studied the Mustang for a long moment, her heart thudding a slow, familiar rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't just a horse. This was what she had been not so long ago, cornered, wounded, wild with fear. "Stay back," she murmured without turning, sensing Cutter's weight behind her. "This needs to be between me and him." He didn't argue, just leaned his tall frame against the corral fence, arms crossed, watching. Nora slipped inside the corral with the patience of a drifting cloud. She didn't move straight for the horse, didn't call out. Instead, she sat down in the dirt, cross-legged, her hat pulled low, her body small and unthreatening, and she waited. Dustfire snorted, stomping the ground, circling wide. He was testing her. Good. Let him. Nora kept her breathing slow, her hands resting palms up on her knees, empty and open. Minutes stretched like hours. Gradually, the Mustang's pacing slowed. His ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring. Curiosity warred with fear. The setting sun painted the world in blood and gold as Dustfire took one tentative step forward. Then another. By the time the stars bloomed overhead, he was close enough that Nora could feel the heat of his breath on her skin. Still, she didn't move. Only when Dustfire, scarred and trembling, stretched his neck and touched his nose to her open palm, did she finally lift her hand. Slow, gentle. She scratched lightly beneath his jaw, feeling the coarse hair, the rapid thrum of his pulse. "You're not broken," she whispered into the cooling air. "You're just learning to trust again." The words weren't just for him. They were for her, too. When she finally stood, Dustfire followed like a shadow, his eyes wide but willing. James Cutter hadn't spoken a word, but as she led the Mustang out of the corral with nothing more than a touch and a whispered promise, she caught the look on his face. It wasn't astonishment. It wasn't pity. It was pride. As if he had known all along she carried this hidden strength, just waiting for the right moment to bloom. Later by the fire, Cutter passed her a tin cup of coffee, his fingers brushing hers just briefly. "You've got a gift," he said simply. Nora stared into the flames. "Maybe. Or maybe I just understand what it means to be trapped and scared." He nodded, accepting her truth without trying to smooth it over with platitudes. They sat together in the easy silence of people who had survived too much to waste words. Above them, the desert stars wheeled silently through the sky. Dustfire slept in the barn, safe for the first time in years. And so, in a way, did Nora. The first warning came on the wind. A strange stillness, thick and heavy, settled over Cutter's Hollow as the sun dipped behind the jagged hills. The animals grew restless, pawing the ground and shifting uneasily. Even Dustfire, usually bold and headstrong, pressed against Nora's side, his breath hot and rapid. James Cutter stood on the porch, arms folded, his gaze pinned to the darkening sky. "Storm's coming," he said, almost to himself. Nora followed his eyes. On the horizon, the clouds were stacking high and black, like mountains building themselves from rage and dust. She knew storms, the real ones and the ones that wore a man's face. This would be both. They moved fast. Cutter and the ranch hands secured the animals, reinforced the barn, battened down anything the wind might carry away. Nora helped where she could, tying canvas over the feed bins, her hands sure and steady. The air crackled with electricity. Every instinct in Nora screamed that this was no ordinary storm. And then, just as the first cold drops splattered against the dirt, Tom rode in from town, his horse lathered and blowing hard. "They're here," he gasped, swinging down from the saddle. 3 men, asking questions about a woman matching Nora's description. The past had found her. James Cutter didn't hesitate. He turned to Nora, his voice low but firm. "You stay here. You're under my roof now. You don't run." Nora opened her mouth to protest, to say she didn't want to bring trouble to his doorstep. But he cut her off with a look. "They want to take something that ain't theirs. They'll have to go through me." It wasn't said like a threat. It was simply a fact. And something inside Nora, tight and trembling for so long, began to loosen. Someone was willing to fight for her, not because she was useful, not because she was property, but because she was worth fighting for. The rain came in sheets, blinding and brutal. Cutter positioned Tom and Levi with rifles at the barn windows, while he took the front porch, the Henry rifle resting easy in his hands. Nora sat by the window of the cottage, Dustfire pacing behind her like a restless spirit. Thunder rolled over the hills, shaking the ground. And then, through the roaring rain, she saw them. 3 figures, cloaked and hunched against the storm, riding hard toward Cutter's Hollow. She rose instinctively, reaching for the pistol Cutter had quietly placed on the table hours ago. A small thing, but deadly in the right hands. Her hands. They came shouting demands, words lost in the howling wind. But Cutter never moved from his place on the porch. "You've got no claim here," he called back, voice cutting through the storm like a blade. One of the riders dismounted, stalking forward, a pistol drawn low and easy. "We don't want no trouble," the man shouted. "Just the woman." "She's under my protection," Cutter said. "You'll get nothing but regret." The gunman raised his weapon, and Nora didn't think. She moved. The cottage door slammed open. She stepped into the storm, the rain slicing across her face, the pistol steady in her hands. "I'm here," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But I ain't going with you." The men froze, taken aback. They had expected fear, pleading. Not this. Not a woman standing straight-backed in the teeth of the storm, daring them to make her a victim again. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, girl," the leader sneered. Cutter shifted his weight, silent and waiting. Nora's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm not a girl anymore," she said coldly, "and I don't run." Lightning split the sky, casting everything in stark, brilliant white. In that instant, she saw Cutter's faint smile, a fierce, proud thing. The riders shifted uneasily. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the look in Cutter's eyes. But they turned. Muttering curses, spitting into the mud, they mounted up and rode back into the howling dark. When the echoes of their departure faded, Nora stood for a long time in the rain, her heart hammering against her ribs. Cutter crossed the muddy yard, rifle lowered. "You did good," he said simply. Nora wiped the rain from her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Not from fear, from the sudden, overwhelming relief of standing her ground and not falling. The storm still raged around them, but inside, where it mattered most, she was finally steady. That night, as the storm battered Cutter's hollow and lightning danced across the open fields, Nora sat by the fire, drying her clothes and braiding her damp hair with fingers that no longer trembled. She wasn't the broken woman who had stepped off the westbound train anymore. The storm passed with the sunrise. The world outside Cutter's hollow was washed clean. The dust pressed flat, the creek swollen but calm, the air sharp with the smell of wet sage and new beginnings. Nora stood barefoot on the porch of her little cottage, watching the mist lift from the hills. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't thinking about running, wasn't planning an escape route, wasn't listening for the sound of pursuit. She simply breathed, and it tasted like freedom. James Cutter joined her, 2 mugs of coffee cradled in his hands. He passed her one without a word, the way you might hand someone a shield before battle. They sipped in silence, the easy kind that wrapped itself around two people who had seen the worst of the world and chosen to stand anyway. "You still thinking of moving on?" Cutter asked eventually, his voice low and careful. Nora didn't answer right away. She looked out at the ranch, at Dustfire grazing near the fence, at Tom and Levi hauling feed, at the smoke curling from the kitchen chimney, at the life that had grown around her when she wasn't paying attention. "No," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'm tired of running." Cutter's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Mighty glad to hear it." Later that morning, Cutter brought her a small battered box. "Found this when I was clearing out the old tack room," he said, setting it carefully on her porch table. Inside lay a simple branding iron, its surface worn smooth by years of use. The initials were still visible, though. J.C. James Cutter, the man who had given her sanctuary, the man who had never once asked for anything in return but trust. Nora traced the letters with one finger, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Not ownership, belonging, a brand not to claim her, but to say, "Here, you are safe, you are home." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I want to stay," she said simply. Cutter nodded, the motion slow and sure. "Then stay," he said. "And if you want it," he added gruffly, "there's a place here for you. Not just work, not just shelter." He hesitated, rare for a man so steady. A partnership, a life. Nora set the box down and crossed the few steps between them. She laid her hand on his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart beneath calloused skin and cotton. "I don't have a name worth anything anymore," she said softly. "Not one I want to keep." Cutter's hand covered hers, warm and certain. "Then choose one," he said. "One that's yours." Nora thought about it. About all the names she had been forced to wear, the lies she'd told, the girl she'd been, and the woman she was becoming. "I think," she said slowly, tasting the words, "I'd like to be called Nora Cutter." Not a possession, a choice, a future. James's smile broke fully then, rare and beautiful. "Mrs. Cutter suits you just fine," he said. That afternoon, with Dustfire watching from the fence line and the smell of fresh rain still clinging to the air, they stood before Judge Holloway under the wide, endless sky. No fancy dress, no crowded church, just two battered hearts stitching themselves together with promises built not on fairy tales, but on trust, grit, and the stubborn belief that even the broken deserve love. When the judge asked for her name, Nora lifted her chin and spoke clear and proud. Nora Cutter. The sun broke through the last of the storm clouds as she signed her new name with steady hands. A name she had chosen, a life she had claimed, a future she would never run from. That night they danced slow and barefoot in the dust outside the cottage, the stars wheeling overhead like witnesses. James Cutter's arms around her felt like the safest place she had ever known. And in the hush of the desert night, as dustfire nickered softly and the earth cooled beneath their feet, Nora knew she had not just found a home. She had become one. If you could choose your own name, your own destiny, what would it be? Tell us in the comments below. Nora chose hope. What would you choose?